Everyone knew Grandma Margaret loved my cousin Rita more. Rita got the lavish European vacations, the expensive heirloom jewelry, and the constant glowing praise. I got absolute cold silence. But on the morning of the will reading, before a single official word was spoken, the estate lawyer touched my arm and whispered a secret. Do not react to anything you hear in that room. There is a second document. My name is Sloane, and I am 33 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been treated like the black sheep of your family, only to prove them all wrong. I stood in the heavy wood-paneled corridor of a prestigious Chicago law firm, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket to hide the slight tremor in my hands. My brother Nathan, who is 36 and works tirelessly as a veterinarian, shifted nervously beside me. His wife Jasmine, a brilliant African-American tax attorney with an analytical mind that rivals my own, held his hand firmly. We were there for the reading of our grandmother's will, and the atmosphere in the hallway was already suffocating with unspoken tension. Just as I reached for the heavy brass handle of the conference room door, Mr. Caldwell stepped directly into my path. He was my grandmother's longtime estate lawyer, a man of strict routines and measured words, so his sudden departure from professional protocol caught me entirely off guard. He glanced quickly over his shoulder, ensuring the long hallway was empty, then leaned in remarkably close to my ear. His voice was barely a breath. Do not react to anything you hear in that room, Sloane. Maintain your composure no matter what happens. There is a second document. Before I could process the massive weight of his words, he pulled back, smoothed his silk tie, and pushed open the heavy oak doors, gesturing for us to enter the room. The contrast inside the conference room was violently jarring. While Nathan, Jasmine, and I wore somber, respectful dark clothing suited for mourning, my Aunt Brenda and her husband Gary were dressed as if they were attending a high-society cocktail party. Brenda wore a bright magenta designer dress that completely ignored any standard of decency, and Gary sported a smug, self-satisfied grin that he did not even try to hide from us. But the real spectacle was my 32-year-old cousin Rita, the absolute golden child of the family. She sat at the very head of the massive mahogany table, wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors and tapping her perfectly manicured nails impatiently against the polished wood. She looked exactly like the cheap imitation of a social media influencer she pretended to be online, a lifestyle funded entirely by my grandmother's bank account. We took our seats in heavy silence. Jasmine gave me a sharp, analytical look, her legal instincts instantly sensing the deep hostility radiating from across the table. I kept my face entirely blank, anchoring all my chaotic thoughts to Mr. Caldwell's whispered warning. Mr. Caldwell took his seat, opened a thick leather binder with excruciating slowness, and began to read the last will and testament of Margaret. The first few pages covered standard legalities and funeral wishes, but the tension in the room snapped like a tight wire when he finally reached the distribution of the family assets. To my granddaughter, Rita. Mr. Caldwell read, his voice painfully neutral and strictly professional. I leave the entirety of the family real estate holding corporation, the beachfront mansion in the Hamptons, and the sum of $15 million in liquid cash assets. Rita let out a loud theatrical gasp of delight, clapping her hands together so hard the sound echoed off the walls. Brenda actually squealed with joy and hugged Gary tightly. They did not even try to contain their naked greed or show an ounce of respect for the woman who had just passed away. Nathan looked down at his lap, his gentle nature preventing him from showing the deep hurt I knew he was feeling. He was left a small, highly insignificant cash sum that barely covered a month of groceries. Then Mr. Caldwell turned the heavy parchment page, and to my granddaughter Sloane, he continued without missing a beat. I leave the sum of exactly $1 along with the contents of safety deposit box number 412 at the First National Bank. He slid a small sealed envelope across the long table toward me. Inside the thin paper, I could feel the distinct outline of a single rusty key. $1. $1 single dollar. Rita burst into a cruel, ringing laugh that filled the entire conference room. She pulled off her sunglasses and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "Oh, that is absolutely priceless!" Rita mocked, her voice dripping with venomous joy. "Grandma finally put you in your exact place. $1. That is hilarious." She reached into her expensive designer handbag, pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper, and tossed it carelessly across the mahogany table. It slid to a stop right in front of my hands. "Since you are the responsible one, Sloane, you can handle this. It is the invoice for the funeral arrangements and the catering services. $45,000. I stared at the staggering invoice, then looked up at my cousin's triumphant, mocking face. "You inherited $15 million and an entire commercial real estate empire less than 2 minutes ago," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level despite the rage boiling in my chest. "And you want me to pay for the funeral out of my own pocket? You got $1 to match your exact worth in this family." Rita snapped back, leaning aggressively over the table. "You have always been so high and mighty with your boring corporate job. Now pay this bill, you lowly accountant. You are just a glorified human calculator anyway, and it is time you made yourself useful." Jasmine shifted instantly in her seat, her posture straightening as she locked eyes with Rita. Her voice was pure, cutting ice. "Actually, Rita, as a tax attorney, I feel professionally obligated to inform you that estate debts are legally settled by the estate itself before any asset distribution occurs. Sloane is not legally responsible for a single cent of this invoice. Furthermore, calling a forensic accountant a human calculator just highlights your profound and embarrassing ignorance of complex financial structures." Brenda's face flushed a deep, angry red. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" she yelled across the table at Jasmine. "You are just an in-law. You have absolutely no say in our family business." And speaking of family business, Brenda turned her vicious gaze toward my brother Nathan. "Now that Rita completely controls the real estate corporation, there are going to be some major changes around here. That little starter home you and your wife are living in belongs to the company portfolio." Rita smiled, a nasty, victorious smirk spreading across her face. "That is exactly right, Mom. Consider this your official verbal notice. You, your smart-mouth wife, and your rescue dogs have exactly 7 days to vacate my property. I want you fully moved out by next Friday so I can bulldoze that pathetic shack and sell the land to commercial developers for a massive profit." Nathan went incredibly pale. The house they lived in was a modest single-story home. Our grandmother had allowed them to rent at a discounted rate while he worked grueling hours to pay off his veterinary school loans. Giving them exactly 7 days to pack up their entire lives and move was not just a minor inconvenience, it was a calculated act of cruelty designed to financially ruin them. Jasmine's eyes narrowed dangerously. I could see the legal arguments forming rapidly in her sharp mind, ready to tear Rita's ridiculous eviction threat apart based on basic tenant rights and eviction laws. She opened her mouth to strike back and destroy Rita's smugness, but I reached under the table and gripped Jasmine's knee firmly. I gave her a microscopic shake of my head. "Do not react," I thought to myself. "There is a second document." I calmly picked up the $45,000 funeral invoice, folded it neatly along the crease, and placed it inside my purse. Then I picked up the small envelope containing my single-dollar bill and the rusty safety deposit box key. I looked directly into Rita's eyes, projecting nothing but absolute freezing calm that I knew would unsettle her more than any screaming match ever could. "Congratulations on your massive inheritance, Rita," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am absolutely sure you will manage it with the exact level of intelligence, grace, and foresight you have displayed here today." I stood up slowly, adjusting the lapels of my jacket. "Nathan, Jasmine, let us go. We have a lot of packing to do." Rita scoffed loudly as we turned our backs and walked toward the door. "That is right, run along, Sloane. Go count someone else's money since you obviously do not have any of your own." Brenda and Gary's loud, mocking laughter followed us completely out of the conference room. I kept my spine perfectly straight, walking down the long carpeted hallway of the law firm without looking back once. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribs, a chaotic mixture of deep rage at their cruelty toward my brother and a burning, intense curiosity about the rusty key burning a hole in my pocket. They thought they had won the ultimate victory. They thought they had crushed us completely into the dirt. But they had absolutely no idea what a seasoned forensic accountant could do with a single rusty key and a hidden financial truth. The morning sun hit the windshield as Jasmine drove her sleek sedan down the Montauk Highway. We were heading straight to the Hamptons. Nathan had stayed behind to start packing their house, utterly devastated by the 7-day eviction notice. I could not let him face Rita today. My mission was simple: retrieve my late father's personal belongings from the estate before Rita trashed them. My father had passed away when I was a teenager, and his study in that Hamptons mansion had remained untouched by my grandmother for over a decade. It held his vintage watches, his journals, and his old vinyl record collection. Jasmine gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles slightly lighter against her rich, dark skin. As a top-tier tax attorney, she spent her days dismantling corporate tax evaders, but Rita's sheer audacity had gotten under her skin. I still cannot believe Caldwell allowed that will reading to proceed without intervening, Jasmine said, her voice tight with professional frustration. I have dealt with hostile estate takeovers before, Sloane, but giving a heavily leveraged real estate portfolio to a woman whose greatest achievement is a sponsored post for Detox Tea is a financial suicide mission. I kept my hand in my coat pocket, my thumb running along the jagged edge of the rusty key. Caldwell is a shark, I replied evenly. He followed the letter of the law. He read the primary document exactly as he was instructed. But he also gave me this key. And in my line of work, a hidden key is never just a sentimental gesture. It is an access point. We just need to get my father's things today. We will deal with the bank tomorrow. We pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Hamptons estate, and the scene before us was nothing short of a grotesque circus. It had not even been 24 hours since the will reading. My grandmother was barely laid to rest. Yet the massive front lawn was completely transformed. Catering trucks lined the circular driveway. Enormous floral arrangements spelling out Rita's new era were being erected near the entrance. Thumping bass from a state-of-the-art sound system vibrated through the closed windows of our car. She was throwing a massive catered celebration party. 2 burly security guards in dark suits stood at the closed gates. Jasmine rolled down the window, presenting her driver's license. "We are here for Sloane's personal property," she stated with absolute legal authority. "We need access to the West Wing study to remove her father's belongings." The taller guard crossed his arms, shaking his head. "Sorry, ladies. The new homeowner gave strict instructions. Nobody from your side of the family is allowed on the premises. Private event today." "This is not a social visit," Jasmine snapped back, shifting effortlessly into her courtroom persona. "Withholding personal property not listed in the estate assets is theft. Open the gate, or I will have the local authorities out here in 10 minutes to explain the legal definition of conversion to you." Before the guard could respond, the heavy iron gates slowly swung inward, but it was not to let us in. A customized pink golf cart rolled down the long driveway, driven by Gary, with Brenda sitting beside him, holding a crystal mimosa glass. Walking casually behind the cart was Rita, dressed in a sparkling sequined poolside outfit, holding her phone up high as she live-streamed herself to her followers. "Oh my gosh, you guys! The new estate is looking absolutely flawless!" Rita cooed into her phone camera, completely ignoring us. "The new era party is going to be iconic. Best inheritance ever." She ended the recording and finally looked our way, an ugly sneer twisting her perfectly contoured face. "Well, well. Look who showed up uninvited to my property. Did you come to beg for your job, Sloane? Because I might need a new pool cleaner." I stepped out of the car, matching her arrogant stare with absolute stillness. "I do not care about your pathetic party, Rita. I am here for my father's boxes in the study. Hand them over and we will leave you to your cheap champagne." Brenda let out a shrill laugh, taking a sip from her glass. "Your father's junk." "Oh, honey, Rita is having that dusty old room completely gutted today to make a walk-in closet for her designer shoes. We already cleared it out." My heart stalled. "Where are his things, Brenda?" Rita snapped her fingers at the security guards. "Boys, bring out the trash." From behind the guardhouse, the two massive men hauled out 4 large battered cardboard boxes. They did not carry them carefully. They dragged them roughly across the pavement and threw them violently over the property line, right onto the dusty shoulder of the public road. The impact split the bottom of the heaviest box. My breath hitched as my father's leather-bound journals, his favorite fountain pens, and a framed photograph of the two of us tumbled out, sliding across the dirty asphalt. The glass on the picture frame shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. The sheer disrespect was suffocating. This was the man who had helped build the very real estate company Rita now claimed to own. "Oops," Rita said with fake sympathy covering her mouth. "Gravity is so clumsy. You better pack that garbage up quickly, Sloane. It is ruining the aesthetic of my front gate. I have important investors arriving in an hour." Jasmine was out of the car in a flash, slamming her door so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Her eyes were blazing with a righteous, terrifying fury. "You malicious, entitled little brat," Jasmine snarled, marching directly toward the property line. "That is willful destruction of property. I am calling the police right now. I will have you cited for vandalism and file a civil suit before your ridiculous party even starts." She pulled out her phone, her thumb already hovering over the emergency dial button. Gary puffed out his chest, stepping off the golf cart to block Jasmine. "Go ahead and call them. We own this land. You are trespassing. My daughter is a multimillionaire now. We will tie you up in court litigation until you are bankrupt. You think a veterinary clinic salary can fight our legal team?" Rita laughed again, pulling her sunglasses down. "Let her call them Dad. It will make great content for my channel." The bitter broke sister-in-law throwing a tantrum on the street. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second, staring at the shattered glass over my father's smiling face in the photograph. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have charged past the guards and dragged Rita by her sequined outfit. But I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in screaming matches. I deal in financial ruin. I look at numbers, leverage, and liabilities. I realized in that exact moment that Rita was behaving like a woman who believed she had infinite resources. She was spending money wildly on this party. She was threatening legal battles. She felt invincible. But wealthy people who suddenly inherit massive estates without understanding the underlying financial mechanics are the easiest targets in the world. I walked over to Jasmine and wrapped my hand firmly around her wrist, pulling the phone away from her face. Jasmine whipped her head toward me, her eyes wide with angry disbelief. "Sloane, do not tell me to stand down. Look at what they did to your father's things. This is a crime." "I know what it is," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register that made Jasmine pause. "But calling the police now will only result in a minor property damage fine. Rita will pay it with a smirk and consider it the cost of entertainment. It is a tiny temporary inconvenience for her." I knelt down on the dirty asphalt and carefully picked up the shattered picture frame. I brushed the dust off my father's face and gently placed it into the unbroken box. I picked up his scattered journals one by one, feeling the rough leather against my palms. I stacked them methodically, completely ignoring the taunting laughter coming from Brenda and Gary on the other side of the iron gate. Once everything was safely secured in the trunk of Jasmine's car, I turned back to face my relatives. Rita was standing with her hands on her hips, looking utterly disappointed that she had not managed to provoke a screaming, viral-worthy reaction from me. "Enjoy your new era, Rita," I said, my tone as flat and unreadable as a bank statement. "Enjoy the caterers, the expensive floral arrangements, and your new walk-in closet. I genuinely hope you savor every single second of this party today." I turned my back on them, climbed into the passenger seat, and closed the door. Jasmine got into the driver's seat, her chest still heaving with residual anger. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. "I cannot believe we are just driving away, Sloane. I could have completely humiliated them with a single police dispatch. We are driving away because they are currently digging their own grave, and I refuse to interrupt them while they are working so hard at it," I said smoothly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusty safety deposit box key, holding it up between us so the sunlight caught its worn edges. "Rita thinks she inherited a kingdom today. I continued staring at the metal key. But my grandmother was a brilliant strategic woman. She knew exactly how greedy Brenda and Rita were. She knew they would throw my father's things onto the street the second they got power. She predicted this exact level of arrogance, and she left me this key before the official reading. Jasmine slowly released her death grip on the steering wheel. Her brilliant legal mind quickly caught up to the implications of my statement. The anger in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. A secondary document, Jasmine murmured, looking at the key. If Caldwell gave you that before reading a will that effectively disinherited you, it means the first will is a distraction, a decoy. Exactly, I said, buckling my seatbelt. Rita is throwing a party on a property she thinks she owns free and clear. But in the world of high finance, ownership is often an illusion masking massive liabilities. We are not calling the police over a shattered picture frame, Jasmine. We are going back to the city. We have an appointment at the First National Bank, and I need you to bring your sharpest tax law expertise. Jasmine started the engine, a slow, dangerous smile finally spreading across her beautiful face. Now you are speaking my language, Sloane. Let us go see what your grandmother really left you. As we drove away from the Hamptons, leaving the thumping music and the grotesque floral arrangements behind, I felt a deep, icy sense of calm wash over me. Rita wanted a war over our family legacy. She wanted to prove she was the ultimate victor. But she had made the fatal mistake of challenging an auditor who was about to uncover the deepest, darkest financial secrets of her newly acquired empire. First National Bank in downtown Chicago was a fortress of limestone and polished marble, existing in a completely different universe from the vulgar thumping noise of my cousin's celebration. Jasmine and I walked through the towering glass doors, the heavy silence of the financial institution matching my intense focus. We bypassed the standard teller lines and approached the private wealth management desk. I produced my identification, my grandmother's death certificate, the court order provided by Mr. Caldwell, and the rusty key. The bank manager, a stern man in a tailored suit, examined the documents with practiced efficiency before nodding and leading us deep into the subterranean levels of the building. The vault was an intimidating space of brushed steel and clinical lighting. The manager located safety deposit box 412, inserted his master key, and gestured for me to use mine. The rusted metal scraped harshly against the internal tumblers, but the lock gave way with a heavy click. The manager slid the long metal drawer out, placed it on a private viewing table, and quietly left us alone, closing the heavy vault door behind him. I stared at the metal container. There was no stack of gold bars. There were no bundles of $100 bills. There was only a single incredibly thick manila folder resting at the bottom. I lifted the folder. It was heavy, packed tight with documents. I broke the wax seal on the clasp and opened it. Resting right on top was a handwritten letter on my grandmother Margaret's personal cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, and entirely unwavering. I took a deep breath, the sterile air of the vault filling my lungs, and began to read aloud so Jasmine could hear. My dearest Sloane, if you are reading this, the grand theatrical performance is finally over. You likely just sat through a highly offensive will reading. You are probably furious, confused, and wondering why I would leave our family legacy to a woman who views a balance sheet as an inconvenience. I need you to understand that everything I did over the last decade was a calculated distraction. I was never blind to Brenda and Rita. I knew exactly what they were doing in the dark. I stopped reading for a fraction of a second, my eyes scanning ahead as the sheer magnitude of my grandmother's awareness hit me. 10 years ago, the letter continued. I noticed discrepancies in the corporate accounts. As you know, I stepped back from day-to-day operations after your grandfather died, trusting Brenda to manage the residential properties. I was wrong. I quietly hired a private investigative accounting firm. What they uncovered was a systematic, deeply greedy embezzlement operation. Brenda and Rita were skimming funds, creating fictitious vendors, inflating renovation invoices, and funneling company money through offshore shell accounts to fund Rita's pathetic attempts at becoming a public figure. They stole over $8 million from the family company over a decade. Jasmine let out a low whistle, leaning over the table to look at the letter. $8 million. That is federal prison territory. Why did she not just hand them over to the authorities back then? I kept reading, finding the exact answer to Jasmine's question. You might ask why I did not simply call the police, Margaret had written. The answer is simple. If I confronted them, Brenda would have hired cutthroat defense attorneys. They would have moved the remaining stolen funds to unreachable accounts. They would have dragged our family name through a humiliating decade-long public trial, and the company your father helped build would have suffered irreparable brand damage. I refused to let them destroy our legacy in the press. So I chose a different strategy. I chose to play the role of the doting, oblivious, easily manipulated old woman. I played favorites. I showered Rita with praise and cheap jewelry to keep her ego inflated and her guard entirely down. I let them think they had completely won my favor, because a greedy person who feels secure is a careless person. They stayed close, they spent the money locally, and they never suspected a thing. But while they were busy playing rich and planning how to spend my estate, I was working with Mr. Caldwell to build a financial guillotine. The documents in this folder are your weapons, Sloane. You have the analytical mind of a true auditor. I am leaving you the tools to finish the job. Protect your brother. Take back our company. Let them have the illusion of wealth until the debt crushes them. I set the letter down, my hands actually shaking with a mixture of profound grief and absolute awe. My grandmother had played the longest, most agonizing game of chess imaginable. She had sacrificed her relationship with me, allowing me to believe she favored my toxic cousin, all to build an airtight trap to save our family's actual legacy. Let us see what kind of guillotine Margaret built, Jasmine said, her professional instincts kicking into overdrive. She reached into the thick folder and began pulling out stacks of legal contracts, tax filings, and property deeds. As a tax attorney, Jasmine could read financial structures like sheet music, and as she flipped through the pages, her eyes grew wider and wider. "Oh my God," Jasmine muttered, rapidly scanning a thick stack of loan agreements. "Sloane, your grandmother was an absolute shark. This is brilliant. This is utterly, terrifyingly brilliant." "Show me," I demanded, stepping closer to the table. Jasmine pointed to the first document, a commercial mortgage agreement. Over the past 5 years, while Rita and Brenda thought they were securing their inheritance, Margaret systematically remortgaged every single property in the corporate portfolio. She took out massive, high-interest mezzanine loans against the commercial buildings. She even took out a maximum equity line of credit against the Hamptons mansion. She leveraged the entire estate up to 90% of its total value, so the company is drowning in debt. I asked, my mind racing, to calculate the implications. If the company is leveraged to the hilt, then the $15 million Rita inherited in cash is meaningless. It will instantly be eaten up by the debt service covenants. "Exactly," Jasmine said, her finger tapping excitedly on the paperwork. "But it gets better, so much better. Where did all that loan money go? Margaret did not spend it. She did not lose it. She transferred every single cent of those leveraged funds into a newly established Delaware Series limited liability company. It is called Vanguard Apex Holdings. Delaware LLCs offer total anonymity. Nobody looking at public records would know who owns it." Jasmine pulled out another staggering stack of paper, sliding a purchase agreement toward me. Vanguard Apex Holdings took all that cash and quietly bought the debt notes from the original lenders. They bought the mortgages on the commercial properties. They bought the lien on the Hamptons mansion. My breath caught in my throat as the financial architecture of my grandmother's trap finally became clear. Margaret used the family company's assets to secure massive loans, then used that loan money to fund an anonymous holding company, and then had that holding company buy the debt back. Which means the family company owes all its massive debt to Vanguard Apex Holdings, I stated, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Jasmine nodded, a fierce, triumphant smile lighting up her face. She pulled the very last document from the bottom of the folder. It was an operating agreement and a certificate of ownership for Vanguard Apex Holdings. She slid it directly in front of me, tapping the signature line. "Read the ownership structure," Sloane, Jasmine commanded. I looked down at the crisp legal document. It clearly listed the managing members of Vanguard Apex Holdings. There was only one name on the entire page. My name, Sloane. 100% ownership shares. Sole managing member. Total executive control. Rita did not inherit a real estate empire today, Jasmine said, her voice echoing off the steel walls of the vault. Rita inherited a hollow shell of a company burdened by $50 million in toxic debt. And the sole entity holding the promissory notes, the only person with the absolute legal authority to collect that debt, foreclose on the properties, and liquidate the company is you. I stared at my name on the document. The single-dollar bill I had received at the will reading was not an insult. It was a binding legal consideration, a necessary component to execute the transfer of the holding company. Rita thought she was a multi-millionaire throwing a party in her newly acquired Hamptons mansion. In reality, she was a squatter throwing a party in a house heavily mortgaged to me. She owed me $50 million and she did not even know it yet. This is why Caldwell told you not to react. Jasmine laughed, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. If you had contested the will, if you had caused a scene and demanded your share of the estate, you would have been fighting for a heavily leveraged sinking ship. By accepting the $1 and walking away, you allowed Rita to blindly accept the primary inheritance. She legally assumed all the liabilities of the estate the second she celebrated in that room. She took the bait completely. I looked at the shattered pieces of my father's picture frame resting in my bag, then down at the absolute power resting in my hands. Brenda and Rita had spent a decade stealing from my family. They had humiliated my brother. They had treated me like dirt under their expensive shoes. They thought they had won the ultimate prize. But I was a forensic accountant. I knew exactly how to track every stolen penny, and now I had the ultimate leverage to force them to pay it all back. "Pack up the files, Jasmine," I said carefully, folding my grandmother's letter and placing it into my jacket pocket. My voice was no longer shaking. It was cold, precise, and completely focused. "We have work to do. Rita wants to play CEO. Let us give her a few days to sit in the big chair. Let her spend her supposed cash inheritance on expensive clothes and stupid parties. I want her to feel entirely invincible." Jasmine gathered the heavy documents, securing them back into the manila folder. "What is our first move?" "We let them rack up a few late fees," I replied, a dark clinical satisfaction settling deep into my bones. "And then we introduce the new owner of Vanguard Apex Holdings to her very worst nightmare, an audit." We left the bank and drove straight to the modest single-story house where Nathan and Jasmine lived. When we walked through the front door, the sight made my chest tighten with a fresh wave of anger. Nathan was standing in the middle of the living room, still wearing his green veterinary scrubs, taping up a cardboard box. His shoulders were slumped, and the heavy exhaustion of a man who had always played by the rules only to be constantly punished for it was etched deeply into his face. He had already started taking down the framed photos from their wedding day. "Stop packing the good china, Nathan," I said, dropping the massive manila folder onto the kitchen island with a heavy thud. "We are only moving out temporarily." Nathan looked up, a roll of packing tape frozen in his hand. "Sloane, we have 7 days. Rita's lawyers are going to show up with the sheriff if we are not out of here. We do not have the money to fight her in a drawn-out eviction battle." Jasmine walked over to her husband, taking the packing tape out of his hand and wrapping her arms around his waist. She looked up at him, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, protective brilliance. "Baby, you are not going to need to fight her. Sloane and I are about to completely dismantle her. Come look at what your grandmother left us." Nathan cautiously approached the kitchen island as Jasmine and I spread the documents across the granite countertop. I laid out the commercial mortgage agreements, the promissory notes, and the Vanguard Apex Holdings operating agreement, showing my absolute ownership. I explained the financial architecture step by step. I watched my brother's eyes widen as he finally understood the magnitude of the trap our grandmother had built. "So Rita does not actually own a real estate empire?" Nathan clarified, his voice barely a whisper, as his finger traced the staggering $50 million debt figure on the primary loan document. "She owns a massive liability." "Exactly," I said, leaning over the paperwork. "The $15 million in cash that Mr. Caldwell announced she inherited today is completely tied up in commercial debt covenants. Those covenants require the real estate corporation to maintain a strict liquidity ratio to secure the loans. If Rita spends even a fraction of that 15 million on personal expenses like that ridiculous Hamptons party, she triggers a material breach of contract. And when she breaches that contract, Jasmine chimed in, her voice ringing with the sharp authority of a seasoned tax attorney. Vanguard Apex Holdings has the legal right to call in the entire $50 million loan immediately. Since Vanguard is solely owned by Sloane, Sloane gets to foreclose on everything Rita claims to own: the Hamptons mansion, the commercial buildings, and this very house. Nathan let out a breath he looked like he had been holding for years. He sank into a bar stool, running a hand over his face. I cannot believe Grandma Margaret planned all of this. But why did she not just expose Brenda and Rita for the embezzlement? Why go through this insane financial maneuvering? Jasmine pulled a separate stack of papers from the folder, her expression turning deadly serious. She slid a series of offshore bank statements and fake vendor invoices toward us, because Margaret knew that embezzlement was only half the crime. Look at this. I have been analyzing these transfers while Sloane drove us back from the city. Brenda and Rita did not just steal $8 million from the family company. They stole from the federal government. Jasmine pointed to a specific recurring transaction on the ledger. Brenda authorized hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments to a property management consulting firm registered in the Cayman Islands. But this firm does not exist. It is a shell company. Brenda funneled the stolen corporate funds into that offshore account, and then the money miraculously reappeared in Rita's personal domestic accounts, disguised as brand sponsorships for her influencer business. They washed the money, I stated, feeling a cold chill of realization. They laundered it, Jasmine corrected, tapping the paper sharply. And more importantly, they never paid a single cent of capital gains or income tax on that $8 million. In the eyes of the Internal Revenue Service, this is willful, premeditated tax evasion and wire fraud. Margaret knew that if she confronted them directly, Brenda would immediately hire aggressive defense lawyers, hide the remaining cash, and tie the family company up in civil litigation for decades. But you cannot negotiate with the IRS. Margaret left us the exact paper trail needed to hand them a federal indictment on a silver platter. So we call the authorities right now, Nathan said, sitting up straight, a sudden spark of vindictive hope in his eyes. We call the police and the IRS today. No, I replied, instantly shaking my head. We do absolutely nothing today. Nathan looked at me like I had lost my mind. Sloane, they threw our father's belongings into the street. They are trying to make Jasmine and me homeless. Why on earth would we wait? Because of the psychology of a golden child, I explained, looking at my brother with absolute certainty. Rita and Brenda have operated with complete impunity their entire lives. If we strike now, they will claim they were confused about the estate transfer. They will play the victims and cry that the evil, jealous relatives are trying to steal their rightful inheritance. We need them to feel entirely invincible. We need them to dig their own grave so deep they can never climb out. Jasmine nodded in total agreement, her legal strategist mind perfectly aligned with my audit background. Sloane is right. Right now, Rita is spending money like water. Every catered party she throws, every designer outfit she buys, and every threatening legal notice she sends us is documented proof of her asserting full executive control over the estate. By acting as the sole owner, she legally assumes all the liabilities that come with it. We need her to spend that restricted cash. We need her to formally breach the loan covenants on her own. We let the wolves think they are the apex predators, I added, looking down at the Vanguard Apex Holdings certificate. They gave you 7 days to move out, Nathan. I say we move out in 5. Let them have this house. Let Rita post her victory all over social media. Let Brenda brag to all her country club friends about how she finally got rid of us. We will rent a nice apartment downtown for you and Jasmine, and we will watch from the shadows while they feast on a poisoned carcass. Nathan looked between Jasmine and me. The exhaustion had completely vanished from his face, replaced by the calm, resolute strength of a man who finally knew his family was safe. He looked at the moving box he had been taping up, then pushed it off the kitchen island. It hit the floor with a satisfying thud. Let them have the house. Nathan agreed, a slow, dangerous smile appearing on his lips. I always hated the plumbing in this place anyway. We spent the rest of the evening locking away the Vanguard Apex documents in a secure digital vault and setting up automated alerts on the commercial loan accounts. We were officially laying a trap. We would maintain absolute radio silence. We would not answer Brenda's taunting text messages. We would not respond to Rita's public social media provocations. We would simply wait for the inevitable moment when their staggering arrogance collided with the brutal reality of compound interest and federal tax law. The wolves had absolutely no idea they were already caught in the snare. 4 days later, Jasmine and I sat in a secluded leather booth at the Wellington, one of downtown Chicago's most exclusive and notoriously expensive steakhouses. The ambient lighting was dim, casting a warm glow over our mahogany table, which was currently covered not just with our dinner plates, but with a series of highly confidential financial printouts. Nathan and Jasmine had successfully moved out of the rental property 2 days ahead of Rita's ridiculous eviction deadline. They were now comfortably settled in a luxury high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, a lease I had quietly secured and paid for upfront using my own independent wealth. We were currently reviewing the real-time banking alerts linked to Vanguard Apex Holdings. The trap my grandmother Margaret built was functioning with absolute terrifying perfection. Rita has already missed the mandatory liquidity threshold for the primary commercial loan, I said, tapping my pen against a highlighted row of numbers on the spreadsheet. The loan covenants explicitly require the Family Real Estate Corporation to maintain a minimum of $5 million in liquid cash reserves at all times. I just pulled the latest tracking data from the holding company portal. Rita transferred $4 million out of the corporate operating account yesterday morning. Jasmine took a sip of her sparkling water, her sharp eyes scanning the document. Where did she move the capital? She wired it to a private events management company in Los Angeles, I replied, shaking my head at the sheer financial illiteracy of my cousin. She also paid a massive retainer to a luxury public relations firm. She is effectively draining the company's operational lifeblood to fund her personal influencer brand. By falling below the liquidity threshold, she has technically placed the entire $50 million loan into default. I have the legal right to execute a demand for immediate full repayment right now. Jasmine smiled, the kind of brilliant, predatory smile that made her opposing counsel sweat in the courtroom. We wait, Jasmine instructed softly. Let the default interest compound for a few more days. Let her sign a few more personal guarantees. She is tying the noose, Sloane. We just have to let her step off the chair. Before I could respond, a sudden explosion of loud, shrill laughter shattered the refined quiet of the restaurant. I looked up and felt my jaw clench. The double doors to the private VIP dining room at the back of the restaurant had just swung open. Emerging from the room, trailed by a flock of sycophantic friends and hangers-on, were Rita and my Aunt Brenda. They were dressed entirely in flashy logo, heavy designer clothing that screamed new money. Rita held an oversized glass of expensive red wine, gesturing wildly as she spoke to a woman beside her. Brenda was draped in a ridiculous fur stole, despite the mild weather, looking around the restaurant as if she owned the entire building. I immediately gathered the Vanguard Apex documents, sliding them seamlessly into my leather briefcase. Do not engage, I murmured to Jasmine. Let them pass. But luck was entirely against us. Rita's eyes swept across the dining room and locked directly onto our booth. A nasty, predatory gleam lit up her face. She whispered something to Brenda, who let out a loud, mocking cackle. Instead of heading toward the exit, Rita abruptly changed her trajectory, marching her entire entourage directly toward our table. Well, what a fascinating coincidence, Rita announced loudly, ensuring that several neighboring tables turned to look. I did not realize. The Wellington started accepting discount coupons. How did you two manage to afford a table here? Did Nathan have to work overtime, cleaning out dog cages? I kept my hands folded neatly on the table, maintaining absolute eye contact with her. We are having a private dinner, Rita. Walk away. Rita ignored me completely, shifting her aggressive focus to Jasmine. Jasmine was wearing a stunning, pristine white silk blouse, radiating the kind of effortless, sophisticated elegance that Rita desperately tried and failed to buy. Rita took a step closer to the table, holding her wine glass precariously over Jasmine's shoulder. You guys must be celebrating your new living arrangement, Rita mocked, her voice dripping with fake pity. I heard you scrambled out of my property like frightened rats. Did you find a nice affordable cardboard box in the suburbs to live in? Jasmine did not even blink. She calmly picked up her water glass. We found a place perfectly suited to our needs, Rita. You should focus on managing your newly acquired assets instead of worrying about our housing situation. Real estate portfolios can be surprisingly complicated for someone who struggles with basic arithmetic. Rita's face flushed an ugly, angry red. The friend standing behind her gasped at Jasmine's blatant insult. Rita's grip on her wine glass tightened, and in a movement that was clearly deliberate, but poorly masked as an accident, she tilted her wrist forward. A heavy splash of dark crimson Cabernet cascaded directly onto Jasmine's shoulder, soaking instantly into the pristine white silk of her designer blouse. The dark red stain spread rapidly, ruining the expensive garment in seconds. Oops! Rita gasped, offering a theatrical, exaggerated pout. Her friends snickered behind their hands. Sorry about that, sister-in-law. My hand just slipped. I guess a lowly lawyer's salary is not enough to buy a new designer shirt, huh? Tell you what, let me just buy your entire law firm so you can afford to shop somewhere other than the discount rack. I felt a surge of pure, violent rage spike through my chest. I started to stand up, ready to physically remove Rita from our table, but Jasmine instantly shot out a hand and gripped my arm, pinning me in place. Jasmine slowly stood up. She was several inches taller than Rita, and she used every bit of that height to tower over my cousin. Jasmine did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She simply pulled a crisp white napkin from the table and began to lightly dab at the ruined silk on her shoulder. Her composure was absolute chilling and entirely terrifying. This is a custom-tailored piece by Alexander McQueen. Jasmine stated, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. It retails for approximately $2,000. What you just committed, Rita, is civil battery and intentional destruction of private property. In the state of Illinois, deliberately pouring a liquid on someone to provoke or insult them satisfies the legal requirement for battery. Rita scoffed, rolling her eyes and waving her empty hand dismissively. Oh, please, sue me then. I inherited $15 million in cash this week. I will write you a check right now and you can buy yourself 10 new ugly shirts. You think your empty legal threats scare me? I am a CEO now. You are a liability. I interjected, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. I slid out of the booth and stood beside Jasmine, flanking her. You are parading around this restaurant pretending to be a titan of industry, Rita, but booking a VIP room at the Wellington requires a minimum spend of $12,000. Did you pay for that using your personal account, or did you illegally withdraw funds from the corporate operating reserves? Brenda stepped forward, pushing past Rita's friends to glare at me. Her fur stole slipped slightly off her shoulder. Do not you dare interrogate my daughter, Sloane, Brenda snarled, pointing a heavily jeweled finger at my face. She is the head of the family business now. She can spend her money however she pleases. You are just a bitter, jealous little girl who got left a single pathetic dollar bill. You are nothing to us. Actually, Brenda, I am an auditor, I replied, tilting my head slightly, and my professional curiosity is piquing. The family corporation is bound by strict financial regulations. If Rita is commingling personal and corporate funds to pay for expensive dinners and cheap publicity stunts, she is committing corporate fraud. But I suppose fraud is somewhat of a family tradition for you two, isn't it? Brenda flinched violently. For a microscopic fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across her eyes. She knew I was referencing the 10 years of embezzlement. She knew I was hinting at the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She recovered quickly, forcing a loud, overly confident laugh, but her posture had grown rigid with sudden anxiety. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Brenda spat, though her voice wavered slightly. You are trying to sound smart to cover up the fact that your own grandmother knew you were a massive disappointment. Let us go, Rita. These broke losers are ruining my appetite. Rita sneered, emboldened by her mother's intervention. She reached into her designer bag, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and threw it onto our table. Here, Sloane, use that to pay for your cheap dinner. Consider it a charitable donation from the new head of the family. Jasmine picked up the $100 bill with two fingers, looking at it as if it were contaminated. She held it out toward the approaching restaurant manager, who had rushed over to investigate the commotion. "Excuse me, sir," Jasmine said, her authoritative tone commanding instant respect from the manager. "This woman just committed an unprovoked physical battery against me. I will be filing a formal police report regarding the incident. However, we will not be needing this loose cash to settle our bill." I pulled my heavy, solid metal black card from my wallet and handed it to the manager. "Please put our dinner on this," I instructed calmly. "And please ensure these women are escorted away from our table. They are causing a public disturbance." The manager looked at the elite black card in his hand, a financial instrument that required an immense net worth just to possess. His demeanor instantly shifted to absolute deference toward me. "Of course, ma'am. I apologize for the disruption." He turned to Rita and Brenda, extending his arm toward the front exit. "Ladies, I must ask you to leave the dining area immediately." Rita's jaw dropped in absolute outrage. "You cannot kick me out. Do you know who I am? I just spent $15,000 in your VIP room. I own a real estate empire." The manager remained entirely unbothered. "I do not care who you claim to be, ma'am. You cannot assault other guests in my restaurant. Please move toward the exit before I call building security." Rita let out a furious, humiliated shriek. Her friends were actively backing away from her, embarrassed by the public reprimand. Brenda grabbed Rita's arm, forcibly pulling her toward the front doors. "You will pay for this disrespect, Sloane," Brenda yelled over her shoulder, drawing stares from every patron in the establishment. "We are going to crush you." We watched them storm out of the restaurant, trailing angry shouts and completely ruining their own celebration. The manager returned my card with a respectful bow and a profuse apology, promising to comp our desserts. I sat back down in the leather booth, looking across the table at Jasmine. She was still calmly dabbing her ruined Alexander McQueen blouse, completely unbothered by the chaos that had just unfolded. "Are you all right?" I asked, genuinely concerned, despite her tough exterior. Jasmine smiled, folding the stained napkin. "I am perfectly fine, Sloane. That blouse was an older season anyway. Besides, Rita just gave me exactly what I wanted." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you want?" Jasmine pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers flying across the screen. "I wanted confirmation that she is actively draining the corporate accounts for personal vanity expenses. While you were verbally destroying Brenda, I noticed the credit card Rita used to pay her VIP tab. It was a black corporate card issued by the family real estate holding company." My eyes widened in realization. She used corporate debt to buy dinner. Jasmine nodded, her smile growing wider and far more dangerous. "Exactly. She is spending heavily restricted loan capital on personal luxury services. She is not just breaching the liquidity covenants anymore, Sloane. She is violating the terms of the mezzanine debt agreements. She is officially self-destructing." I pulled out my phone and logged into the Vanguard Apex Holdings backend portal. Sure enough, a fresh alert flashed on the screen. A new charge of $15,000 had just been processed against the corporate credit line. "The trap is fully sprung," I said, staring at the digital numbers that confirmed Rita's impending financial doom. "She thinks she humiliated us tonight. She thinks she proved her superiority." Jasmine picked up her water glass, raising it in a mock toast. "Let her think that. We have the paper trail for tax evasion, corporate fraud, and massive debt default. The only thing left to do is schedule the execution." The execution schedule accelerated much faster than either of us could have anticipated. Barely 48 hours after our confrontation at the Wellington, I sat at my sleek glass desk in my corner office, staring intently at my secure dual monitors. As a senior forensic accountant, my days were usually spent untangling the complex webs of corporate fraudsters and corrupt hedge fund managers. But today, the most fascinating financial puzzle was sitting right in my personal encrypted inbox. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and reviewed the urgent notification that had just popped up on the Vanguard Apex Holdings administrative dashboard. An external commercial broker had submitted a formal request for a secondary mezzanine loan on behalf of my family's real estate corporation. The requested amount was $10 million. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the digital paperwork with absolute disbelief. Rita was actually trying to borrow another $10 million against a property portfolio that was already leveraged to 90% of its total value. In the highly regulated world of commercial real estate finance, taking out a subordinate loan against an already heavily mortgaged asset requires the explicit written consent of the primary lien holder. Since my grandmother Margaret had masterfully engineered Vanguard Apex Holdings to be the primary lien holder, the broker was legally forced to submit this massive loan request directly to my anonymous company for approval. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed Jasmine. She answered on the second ring, the background noise of her busy tax law firm filtering through the speaker. "Cancel whatever meetings you have for the next hour," I instructed, my voice sharp with adrenaline. "I am sending a secure file to your encrypted server right now. You need to look at what your absolute favorite sister-in-law is trying to do." Within 20 minutes, I was sitting across from Jasmine in her expansive office overlooking the Chicago skyline. She had printed out the 100-page loan application and spread the documents across her massive conference table. She stood with her arms crossed, reading the executive summary with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. She wants $10 million in liquid capital to launch a luxury cosmetics brand, Jasmine said, her voice dripping with absolute incredulity. She is calling the brand Gilded Cosmetics. She intends to use $5 million for product inventory and manufacturing, and the other $5 million to host a massive celebrity-studded launch gala at the Hamptons mansion next month. She is literally borrowing millions just to throw a party for herself. I nodded, tapping my finger against the collateral schedule page. But look at what she is offering as security for the loan. She is listing the Hamptons mansion and 3 of our prime downtown commercial buildings as the primary collateral. Jasmine let out a sharp, genuine laugh, shaking her head in amazement. The sheer stupidity of this woman is genuinely breathtaking. She does not realize she does not actually own enough equity in those properties to guarantee a $10,000 car loan, let alone a $10 million corporate note. She thinks because her name is on the deed, she owns the buildings free and clear. She has completely ignored the existing $50 million encumbrance held by Vanguard Apex. If this loan application went to any normal traditional bank, I explained calmly, the underwriters would take one look at the debt-to-income ratio immediately, deny the application, and flag the corporate account for extreme risk. Furthermore, a traditional primary lender would view this reckless attempt to secure secondary financing as a direct violation of the original loan covenants. They would instantly freeze her operational accounts and begin foreclosure proceedings today. Jasmine looked up from the paperwork, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intense, calculated understanding. "But Vanguard Apex Holdings is not a normal bank. Vanguard Apex Holdings is you, Sloane." "Exactly," I replied, leaning back in the plush leather conference chair. "I control the debt. I control the approval process. If I deny this loan, Rita's cosmetics brand dies today. She throws a tantrum, realizes she is broke, and the game ends prematurely. She gets away with just losing the inherited properties. But if I approve this loan through a shell subsidiary, I am giving her exactly what she asked for. I am giving her $10 million of fresh rope to hang herself with." Jasmine leaned over the table, her legal instincts taking total control of the strategy. "If you approve this, Sloane, we need to structure it perfectly. We do not just grant a standard corporate loan. We demand a personal guarantee." I smiled, feeling a deep wave of professional satisfaction. A personal guarantee. The ultimate financial death sentence. Right now, Jasmine explained, rapidly pacing the length of her office, the existing $50 million debt is entirely corporate. If Rita defaults, Vanguard Apex can seize the real estate portfolio and the corporate bank accounts, but her personal assets are technically shielded. If we grant her this new $10 million loan, we embed an ironclad personal guarantee clause into the fine print. We make her sign a document stating that if she defaults on the cosmetic brand loan, she is personally, individually liable for the entire balance. Which means, I finished her thought, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register, when she inevitably defaults, I do not just take back the family business and the Hamptons mansion. I get to seize her personal bank accounts. I get to seize her designer cars. I get to liquidate her jewelry collection. I take absolutely everything with her name on it." Jasmine stopped pacing and slammed her hand down on the table, her eyes practically glowing with predatory excitement. We let her build her ridiculous cosmetic empire. We let her order the inventory. We let her pay the caterers for her massive Hamptons gala. We let her stand on a stage in front of the entire world and declare herself a self-made billionaire. And then we pull the floor out from under her. We spent the next 3 hours drafting the most aggressive, unforgiving loan approval contract I had ever seen in my professional career. We utilized a secondary shell company, completely untraceable, but legally bound to Vanguard Apex Holdings to act as the lending entity. Jasmine buried the personal guarantee clause deep within page 67 of the contract, masking it under complex legal jargon regarding cross-collateralization and personal indemnity. It was entirely legal, perfectly binding, and completely devastating to anyone arrogant enough to sign a financial contract without having a competent lawyer review it first. But Rita was arrogant. She was the golden child who had never faced a single consequence in her entire life. She believed she was a genius simply because my grandmother had previously handed her everything on a silver platter. She would never pay a corporate attorney to read a contract that was offering her $10 million in cash. I signed the approval documents with my authorized digital signature sealing the financial fate of my cousin. We transmitted the approval package back to her broker. The trap was no longer just set. The jaws were currently locked wide open, and Rita was sprinting directly toward them. The immediate aftermath was exactly as predictable as we had calculated. Within 48 hours of the loan funds hitting her account, Rita became entirely unhinged on social media. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications as she flooded her platforms with videos of her newly acquired wealth. She posted tours of the Hamptons mansion, showing off the construction crews tearing apart my late father's beautiful study to build her massive shoe closet. She posted videos of herself sitting in the back of a chauffeured limousine drinking champagne and bragging about being a self-funded beauty mogul. Then came the grand announcement. Rita posted a highly produced, overly edited video invitation for the official launch gala of Gilded Cosmetics. She was renting out the entire lower lawn of the Hamptons estate. She boasted about hiring a Michelin star catering team, importing thousands of exotic flowers from overseas, and securing a private performance from a chart-topping pop star. She claimed she was inviting the absolute elite of the beauty industry, major fashion magazine editors, and high-profile investors. She was positioning herself not just as a wealthy heiress, but as a brilliant business visionary. Every single dollar she flaunted on camera was borrowed money. Every single expense pushed her deeper into an inescapable void of debt. She was throwing the party of the decade using funds that belonged entirely to me. Nathan came over to my apartment later that evening to review the progress. He sat on my sofa watching one of Rita's live streams on my tablet. He looked completely bewildered by the sheer scale of her spending. "I knew she was greedy," Nathan muttered, shaking his head as Rita showed off a custom diamond necklace she had purchased for the gala. "But this is a whole new level of delusion. She thinks she earned this. She truly believes she is a genius. She is acting like a woman who has never been told no," I replied, pouring us both a glass of bourbon. Brenda spent 30 years convincing Rita she was superior to everyone else. Margaret spent 10 years reinforcing that delusion to keep them distracted from the embezzlement. Rita has no concept of financial gravity. She thinks money just magically appears because she exists. Nathan took a sip of his drink, his eyes lingering on the screen. "What happens when the money runs out, Sloane? What happens when she realizes the accounts are empty?" I sat down next to my brother, my gaze cold and absolute. The $10 million will be entirely gone by the night of the gala. She will have spent the manufacturing budget on party favors and public relations. When the first massive monthly interest payment comes due, the accounts will bounce. She will receive a default notice. But she will not panic immediately. She will assume she can just bully the bank or take out another loan to cover the difference. "And that is when we strike?" Nathan asked softly. "That is when we execute," I corrected him. "We let her put on her beautiful dress. We let her stand in front of the cameras. We let her have the exact moment she has craved her entire life, and then we introduce her to the real owner of her empire. But the arrogance of my Aunt Brenda and Cousin Rita was not limited to reckless spending. They were malicious. They were vindictive. They were not satisfied with simply stealing the family legacy and pretending I did not exist. They actively wanted to destroy whatever independent success I had built for myself. They wanted me broken, humiliated, and begging for scraps. As the days counted down to the massive Hamptons gala, Brenda decided to take her cruelty to the next level. Unaware that I was the phantom hand controlling their financial destiny, Brenda believed she had the ultimate power to ruin my life. She decided to use her stolen wealth and fake social influence to attack the one thing I truly valued, my career. She decided it was time to get the lowly forensic accountant fired. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning. I had just arrived at my desk at the financial advisory firm in downtown Chicago, hanging my wet coat on the rack when the intercom buzzed. It was the executive assistant for the managing partner of the firm, David Kensington. Mr. Kensington requested my immediate presence in his corner office. The tone of her voice was unnaturally stiff, entirely lacking our usual friendly morning banter. As a seasoned forensic accountant, I am trained to detect subtle anomalies in human behavior just as accurately as I detect discrepancies in a spreadsheet. I knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my secure leather briefcase, an item that had not left my side since the day Jasmine and I opened my grandmother's safety deposit box, and walked down the long glass-walled corridor. When I entered the corner office, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. David Kensington sat behind his massive mahogany desk, with his hands steepled under his chin. He was a man who valued corporate reputation and wealthy clients above absolutely everything else. Sitting on the desk, perfectly centered on his leather blotter, was a single sheet of paper with the firm's official letterhead. A termination notice. "Please sit down, Sloane," David said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual warmth. "I prefer to remain standing," I replied. My eyes locked on the document resting on his desk. "What is this about David?" He let out a heavy sigh, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We received a highly disturbing phone call this morning from a very prominent individual. Your Aunt Brenda. She contacted our executive board directly. She claims that you have been utilizing proprietary firm software and confidential databases to illegally stalk her family. She stated you are conducting a rogue, unauthorized investigation out of sheer jealousy over her daughter's recent massive inheritance." I kept my face completely impassive, though a cold spark of amusement ignited in my chest. Brenda was genuinely trying to play corporate hardball. David continued, his tone turning severe. "Brenda informed the board that her daughter Rita is now the sole proprietor of a massive real estate empire. She offered to transfer their entire corporate portfolio, along with $15 million in liquid cash, to our firm for wealth management. It is a highly lucrative account, Sloane. One of the biggest we could land this quarter." "Let me guess," I interjected smoothly. "The transfer of that massive account comes with one specific non-negotiable condition. I must be terminated immediately." David looked down at the termination letter, a flicker of genuine regret crossing his face. "She threatened to launch a massive public relations campaign against our firm if we kept you on the payroll. She said she would tell the entire Chicago elite circle that we harbor jealous, unethical employees who harass wealthy families." "I am sorry, Sloane. You are one of the most brilliant forensic auditors I have ever worked with, but the firm simply cannot afford a public scandal of this magnitude. I have no choice. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Please pack up your desk." He slid the termination notice across the mahogany wood toward me. He expected me to cry. He expected me to panic, to beg for my job, to desperately explain that Brenda was lying. That is exactly what a normal employee facing sudden ruin would do. Instead, I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed brightly in the tense silence of the executive office. I did not reach for the termination notice. I reached for the brass latches of my leather briefcase. David looked at me in profound confusion. "Sloane, this is not a joke. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a massive 200-page bound document. It was stamped with red, bold lettering, denoting absolute confidentiality. I did not gently hand it to him. I raised my arm and slammed the heavy forensic audit report directly down onto his desk. The impact shook his coffee cup and completely covered my termination letter. Before you sign that pathetic piece of paper, David, I strongly suggest you read the executive summary of my unauthorized investigation. I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that made him flinch. Because if you fire me today to appease that woman, or worse, if you actually accept Brenda and Rita as clients of this firm, you will lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom. David stared at the thick document, then slowly looked up at my face. What is this, Sloane? That is a fully verified, meticulously documented forensic audit proving 10 years of systematic corporate embezzlement, offshore money laundering, and premeditated federal tax evasion, I stated coldly. Brenda did not inherit a real estate empire. She and Rita stole $8 million from my family's corporation. They funneled it through fictitious property management vendors and washed it through anonymous shell companies in the Cayman Islands to fund Rita's pathetic social media career. David's face lost all its color. He reached out with a trembling hand and opened the cover of the report. My sister-in-law is a top-tier tax attorney. I continued pacing slowly in front of his desk. She and I spent the entire weekend mapping the financial architecture of their crimes. If you turn to page 42, you will see the exact wire transfer routing numbers. If you turn to page 60, you will see the fraudulent tax returns Brenda filed to hide the stolen capital from the Internal Revenue Service. I watched David's eyes scan the executive summary. As a financial professional, he instantly recognized the severity of the data in front of him. He was looking at a financial death sentence. And as for that $15 million in liquid cash she promised to bring to this firm, I added, twisting the knife, it does not exist. The family company is burdened by $50 million in highly toxic mezzanine debt. Rita is currently breaching her loan covenants to throw a launch party for a fake cosmetics brand. The entire empire is a crumbling facade, and the holding company that owns all of their debt is controlled entirely by me. David snapped his head up, his jaw actually dropping open. You own their debt? 100% of it, I confirmed with a dark, predatory smile. My grandmother orchestrated a complete hostile takeover of her own company before she died to trap them. I am the sole managing member of Vanguard Apex Holdings. I hold the promissory notes on the Hamptons mansion, the commercial buildings, and every single dollar Rita thinks she owns. David slowly sank back into his luxurious leather chair. The realization of how close he had just come to stepping into an active federal crime scene washed over him. In the financial sector, knowingly accepting laundered money makes the advisory firm complicit in the crime. Brenda had tried to lure his company into a federal money laundering investigation just to spite me. If you fire me today, David, I said, leaning over his desk and placing both hands flat on the polished wood, you send a clear message to the authorities that this firm protects tax evaders and punishes the auditors who uncover them. I already have a meeting scheduled with the Financial Crimes Division of the IRS. My sister-in-law has prepared the whistleblower submission. You need to decide right now which side of the federal indictment you want to be on. David did not hesitate for another second. He grabbed the termination notice out from under the heavy forensic report and aggressively tore it into tiny pieces, throwing the scraps directly into his wastebasket. Sloane. I had absolutely no idea. David stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. You have to believe me. If I had known these women were engaging in federal wire fraud, I never would have taken the call. They presented themselves as legitimate high-net-worth prospective clients. I know, David. They are exceptionally good at pretending to be something they are not, I replied, straightening my posture. But their illusion ends this weekend. David looked down at the shredded paper in his trash can, then back up at me with a newfound look of absolute terrified respect. He was looking at a woman who held the power to destroy a $50 million empire with a single phone call. What do you need me to do, Sloane? He asked, his voice entirely compliant. I want you to call Brenda back right now, I instructed calmly. I want you to use your best, most apologetic customer service voice. Tell her that you reviewed her complaints and found my behavior completely unacceptable. Tell her that I was escorted out of the building in tears. Tell her that I am entirely ruined. David frowned in confusion. You want her to think she won? You want her to think you are unemployed? I want her to feel like a god, I said, walking toward the office door and gripping the brass handle. Rita is throwing a massive multi-million-dollar gala in the Hamptons this Saturday to launch her fake beauty brand. She expects the entire world to bow at her feet. If she thinks she successfully destroyed my career today, her arrogance will peak. She will be completely blind to the threat. She will walk onto that stage believing she is untouchable. I opened the door, giving my boss one final chilling glance. And that is the exact moment I am going to pull the floor out from under her. Call her David. Give her the good news. I walked out of the executive office feeling an incredible surge of power vibrating through my veins. Brenda thought she could use her stolen wealth to crush me. She thought her fake influence could separate me from the career I had worked so hard to build. But she had wildly underestimated the woman she was dealing with. By trying to get me fired, she had only solidified my resolve. She had practically gift-wrapped her own destruction. I returned to my desk, picked up my phone, and sent a single text message to Jasmine. The bait was taken. Brenda thinks I am fired. The execution is fully authorized for Saturday night. Get your best dress ready, counselor. We are going to a party. Jasmine's reply came through less than a minute later. It was just a picture of a stunning, sharply tailored black evening gown, followed by a single line of text. I am ready to ruin some lives. The countdown to the Hamptons Gala had officially begun. Rita and Brenda were busy preparing for the greatest night of their lives, completely unaware that the guest list included the two women who held the absolute legal authority to strip them of everything they owned. The stage was set for a public financial slaughter, and I was going to ensure every single person in their elite social circle had a front-row seat to their devastation. Saturday night arrived with a cool, crisp ocean breeze that swept across the sprawling Hamptons estate. The transformation of my grandmother's property was a grotesque monument to financial illiteracy. As Jasmine and I stepped out of our hired black car, the sheer scale of Rita's reckless spending assaulted our senses. The massive front lawn had been entirely floored over with custom white acrylic staging. A multi-story clear tent housed enormous crystal chandeliers, while walls of imported white orchids lined the pathways. Valets rushed to park an endless stream of Ferraris and Bentleys. Flashbulbs strobed frantically near a massive press wall, emblazoned with the gold foil logo of Gilded Cosmetics. Rita had borrowed $10 million, and she was clearly determined to burn through every single cent of it before midnight. Jasmine and I did not look like two women who had just been evicted and fired. We looked like the executioners we were. Jasmine was a vision of absolute power in her sharply tailored floor-length black gown, the dark fabric contrasting beautifully with her rich, flawless skin. She carried a sleek leather clutch that held our most lethal financial documents. I wore a structured emerald green silk suit that felt like armor. We bypassed the standard guest check-in line and walked directly onto the white carpet leading to the main event space. We belonged there because legally I owned the very ground we were walking on. The main tent was packed with the exact crowd Rita had desperately craved her entire life. Fashion magazine editors, beauty influencers, and wealthy socialites milled about sipping vintage champagne from crystal flutes. Waiters passed around trays of caviar and gold leaf-topped hors d'oeuvres. A massive stage occupied the far end of the tent, featuring a giant digital screen displaying Rita's heavily edited face, modeling her new cosmetic line. We moved through the crowd with quiet, predatory grace. I scanned the room, calculating the costs of the lighting rigs, the premium open bars, and the celebrity DJ warming up on the stage. Every flower, every glass of champagne, and every spotlight was paid for by the toxic debt I controlled. It did not take long for the guest of honor to spot the intruders. Rita was standing near the press wall, surrounded by a swarm of photographers and minor celebrities. She wore a completely sheer, diamond-encrusted gown that caught the flashbulbs like a disco ball. Brenda stood right beside her, draped in yet another ridiculous fur, beaming at the cameras, with the smug satisfaction of a woman who thought she had successfully conquered the world. When Rita's eyes locked onto mine, her smile widened into a malicious, predatory grin. She whispered something to the event coordinator standing nearby. The coordinator immediately signaled the audio technician. The loud, pulsing club music abruptly faded to a low hum, drawing the attention of the entire gala toward the main stage. Rita grabbed a silver rhinestone-covered microphone from a nearby stand and marched directly toward the center of the room. The cameras followed her every move. She wanted an audience. She wanted a spectacle. She was about to give me the perfect platform to destroy her. "Excuse me, everyone," Rita announced, her voice echoing loudly through the massive sound system. "Could I have your attention for just a moment? We have some very special, unexpected gatecrashers tonight." The crowd of investors, editors, and socialites parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, clear path between where I stood with Jasmine and where Rita stood holding the microphone. Hundreds of eyes turned to stare at us. I kept my posture completely straight, my hands resting calmly at my sides. Jasmine offered a cool, unimpressed smile to the surrounding onlookers. Rita walked slowly down the white acrylic floor, gesturing dramatically toward me with her free hand. "For those of you who do not know, this is my cousin Sloane. I am honestly shocked she made it past security. You see, Sloane has had a very difficult week. First, my grandmother read her last will and testament and decided that Sloane was only worth a single solitary dollar bill." A low murmur rippled through the elite crowd. Some guests chuckled quietly while others looked on with morbid curiosity. Brenda stepped forward, standing behind Rita to offer her loud, obnoxious laughter of support. "But wait, it gets better," Rita continued, turning to the press photographers and making sure they were capturing my face. "Not only did she get completely disinherited, but I also had to evict her brother from my property. And just to top it all off, Sloane actually got fired from her boring little accounting job 2 days ago. She is completely broke, totally unemployed, and entirely desperate. I guess she showed up tonight hoping I would give her some leftover catering to take home to her miserable family." The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding wave. The journalists and social media influencers eagerly filmed the dramatic family confrontation. Rita was playing the role of the triumphant, wealthy heiress, humiliating her jealous, impoverished relative. She thrived on the cruelty of it. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity, my career, and my legacy in front of the most powerful people in the city. I did not break eye contact with her. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not look away from the flashing cameras. I waited for her loud, mocking laughter to echo through the tent and slowly die down. I let the heavy, awkward silence stretch for exactly 3 seconds to ensure every single person in that tent was hanging on my next move. Then I took a deliberate, measured step forward. "Are you quite finished with your opening remarks, Rita?" I asked. I did not have a microphone, but my voice was sharp and projected perfectly through the hushed room. "Because your public relations team is going to have a very difficult time spinning the rest of this evening." Rita scoffed, planting her hand on her hip. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Sloane audit my party favors? Go home before I have security physically drag you out of my house." I took another step closer, closing the distance between us until I was standing just a few feet away from her sparkling designer gown. Jasmine stepped up right beside me, opening the brass clasp of her leather clutch with a sharp, decisive click. "I am not here for the catering." "Rita," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so the investors in the front row could hear every single syllable. "And I certainly do not need a job. I am here because someone has to inform your investors, your vendors, and the press that the woman standing before them is an absolute fraud." Rita sneered, gripping the microphone tighter. "You are pathetic. You have absolutely nothing." I smiled, the cold, clinical expression of a predator looking at a trapped meal. "I have the receipts, Rita. Every single one of them. And tonight, we are settling all of your accounts." I did not wait for Rita to process my words. I stepped forward, reached out with absolute precision, and smoothly slid the rhinestone-covered microphone right out of her manicured hand. She was so entirely shocked by my sheer audacity that her fingers simply went slack. I turned my back to her and faced the sea of flashing cameras, bewildered investors, and whispering socialites. "Thank you for that incredibly colorful introduction, Rita," I said, my voice echoing powerfully off the massive crystal chandeliers hanging above us. "But you left out a few critical details regarding my current financial status. I am not here looking for leftover catering. I am actually here tonight as your largest financial partner." The journalist standing at the press wall instantly stopped whispering. The rapid click of camera shutters intensified as lenses zoomed in on my face. The wealthy investors seated in the front row, ruthless men and women who could smell money and blood in the water from a mile away, leaned forward with sudden predatory interest. The entire dynamic of the room shifted in a fraction of a second. Brenda lunged forward, her ridiculous fur stole slipping completely off her shoulders and landing on the white acrylic floor. "Give her back that microphone right now, you jealous little brat!" Brenda shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of purple. "Security! Get in here and remove her!" Jasmine stepped smoothly into Brenda's path, positioning herself between my aunt and me. She held up a single crisp, legal document, her posture radiating the kind of terrifying absolute authority that only a top-tier tax attorney possessed. "Lay one hand on my sister-in-law, Brenda, and I will have you arrested for assault before you can even blink," Jasmine warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. "Furthermore, any security guard who touches the legal owner of this property will be personally named as a co-defendant in a massive civil lawsuit for battery and unlawful detention." The two burly security guards who had started to move toward the stage abruptly stopped in their tracks. They exchanged nervous glances and slowly backed away. They were paid hourly wages to watch doors. They were certainly not going to risk devastating personal lawsuits to protect a woman throwing a temper tantrum. I turned my attention back to the crowd, making direct eye contact with the prominent beauty industry investors Rita had been desperately trying to impress all night. "My cousin loves to flaunt her wealth." I continued pacing slowly and deliberately across the pristine stage. "She told you all that she inherited a real estate empire and $15 million in liquid cash. She told you she is a self-funded beauty mogul who built Gilded Cosmetics from the ground up. What she conveniently failed to mention is that her entire empire is currently burdened by $50 million in highly toxic, heavily restricted commercial debt." "That is a lie!" Rita screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed frantically at me. Her diamond-encrusted gown sparkled aggressively as she trembled with rage. "Do not listen to her. She is a crazy, unemployed accountant trying to ruin my brand launch because she is broke." I gestured to Jasmine with my free hand. Jasmine unzipped her sleek leather clutch and pulled out a thick stack of executive financial summaries we had prepared earlier that afternoon. She did not hand them to Rita. She walked directly to the front row and began passing the documents to the leading investors, financial journalists, and fashion magazine editors. "Read the commercial loan covenants, ladies and gentlemen," I instructed the crowd, pointing toward the paperwork Jasmine was distributing. Those documents legally prove that the $15 million Rita inherited was heavily restricted capital. It was contractually required to remain untouched in the corporate operating accounts to satisfy the strict liquidity threshold of her massive commercial loans. But Rita does not understand basic finance. She drained $4 million from those restricted accounts this week to pay for this exact clear tent, the imported white orchids, the vintage champagne, and the celebrity DJ you are all currently enjoying. The investors rapidly flipped through the documents. I watched a prominent venture capitalist in the front row trace his finger along the highlighted liquidity covenant clause. He looked up at Rita, his expression morphing from polite interest into utter professional disgust. He immediately set his champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray and took a deliberate step away from the stage. "But draining the corporate accounts was not enough for her," I added, my voice cutting through the rising chaotic murmurs of the elite crowd. 2 days ago, Rita realized she was running out of cash, so she applied for a secondary mezzanine loan of $10 million to fund the manufacturing and marketing of Gilded Cosmetics. She used this very Hamptons mansion and 3 prime commercial properties in downtown Chicago as collateral to secure that cash. Rita crossed her arms, trying to project an image of defiant power despite her visibly shaking hands. "So what if I took out a loan?" she yelled into the crowd, desperately trying to salvage her image. "I got approved. The $10 million is sitting in my corporate account right now. I am a CEO. I know how to use financial leverage to build a brand. You are just furious because you could never get approved for a credit card." "You do not know the first thing about financial leverage, Rita," I countered coldly, turning to look her directly in the eyes. "Because if you did, you would have actually read the lending contract before you blindly signed it. You would have looked at the name of the holding company issuing the loan. You borrowed $10 million from an anonymous Delaware shell corporation called Vanguard Apex Holdings." Rita scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I do not care what the bank is called. Their money cleared." I took a step closer to her, lowering the microphone just enough so my next words felt intensely personal, yet loud enough for the hungry press corps to capture every single syllable. "I am the sole managing member of Vanguard Apex Holdings, Rita. I am the one who reviewed your desperate application. I am the one who approved your loan. I hold the promissory notes on this mansion. I hold the primary lien on your commercial properties. Every single dollar you spent on this ridiculous party was borrowed directly from me." The entire tent erupted into shocked, deafening gasps. The investors reading Jasmine's documents suddenly nodded in brutal realization, pointing at the ownership structures printed clearly on the pages. The journalists typed frantically on their phones, the flashbulbs firing in a continuous blinding wave. The story had just shifted from a boring beauty brand launch into a spectacular high-society financial slaughter. "No!" Rita gasped, physically stumbling backward as if I had struck her across the face. "No, that is impossible. That is a lie." Caldwell read the will. "Grandma left it all to me. You only got $1. I saw the key. You got nothing." That $1 was the legal consideration required to execute the transfer of the holding company into my name, I explained, driving the final nail into the coffin of her arrogance. Grandmother Margaret knew exactly how greedy you and your mother were. She spent 5 years secretly remortgaging the family business, transferring the massive debt to an anonymous company, and then she left that company entirely to me. She handed you a sinking ship, Rita, and you were arrogant enough to throw a multi-million-dollar party on the deck while the hull was actively taking on water. Brenda pushed past a reporter, her face twisted in absolute panic. She tried to grab one of the financial summaries from an investor's hand, but the man pulled it away, glaring at her with open contempt. "You cannot do this," Brenda shrieked at me. "We will sue you. We will tie this up in court for decades. We own the company." "You own a company that is currently in default," I announced, raising the microphone again, so my voice boomed across the estate, drowning out Brenda's hysterical threats. "You breached the liquidity covenants on Tuesday when you paid the caterers. You defaulted on the secondary loan yesterday when you signed the commercial guarantees without securing primary lender consent. As of this exact moment, you are in material breach of $60 million in corporate debt. I am officially calling the loan." Jasmine stepped up onto the white acrylic stage and stood right beside me. She held up the final, most devastating document in our arsenal. It was the signature page of the $10 million loan Rita had blindly executed. "And because you refused to hire competent legal counsel before signing a $10 million financial instrument," Jasmine projected her voice with crystal-clear, terrifying articulation, "you completely missed the personal guarantee clause hidden deep within page 67. Rita stared at Jasmine, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. "What does that mean? What is a personal guarantee?" "A personal guarantee," Jasmine explained to the fascinated, utterly silent crowd, "means that when Sloane forecloses on the corporate assets tomorrow morning, to recover the debt, the liability does not stop at the company door. Sloane has the absolute legal right to seize your personal bank accounts. She gets to seize your designer jewelry. She gets to seize your luxury cars, your designer wardrobe, and any future income you ever generate until the entire $60 million is repaid in full." Rita's knees literally buckled. She collapsed onto the pristine white stage, her heavy diamond-encrusted gown pooling around her like a glittering cage. She stared up at me, her eyes wide with a level of sheer, unadulterated terror I had never seen before. She finally realized the absolute magnitude of her mistake. She did not just lose the inheritance, she had signed away her entire future. I looked down at my cousin, feeling no pity, no remorse, and no hesitation. She had thrown my father's belongings into the dirt. She had tried to make my brother homeless. She had mocked my career and belittled my existence. Now she was kneeling on a stage she could not afford, wearing a dress she did not own, begging for a mercy I was never going to give her. I stood on the edge of that white acrylic stage, the silence that rushed in after the music died being far more deafening than the bass had ever been. I could see the sweat beading on the sound engineer's forehead as he realized I had no intention of handing the microphone back. I locked eyes with Jasmine, who was already positioned like a panther at the edge of the front row. With a sharp, decisive nod from me, she moved. Jasmine didn't just walk through the crowd, she commanded it. Her black silk gown flowed behind her like a shadow as she began handing out the heavy cream-colored envelopes we had prepared with clinical precision. These weren't party favors. They were financial autopsies. I watched her reach the front row, moving toward the venture capitalists and private equity sharks Rita had been desperately trying to lure into her web all night. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice projecting clearly through the massive speakers, calm and steady. Please take a moment to review the documents being distributed by my colleague. They contain the true valuation of Gilded Cosmetics and the actual legal standing of the Preston family real estate holdings. I watched Mr. Sterling, a man whose net worth could buy half of Chicago, tear open his envelope. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, widened as he scanned the first page. He looked at the UCC filings, then up at Rita, then back at the paper. The predatory interest I had seen on his face moments ago turned into something much sharper: professional contempt. He set his champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray as if it were contaminated. "What is this?" Rita Sterling asked, his voice cutting through the whispers of the crowd. "This filing says your primary properties are under a blanket lien by a company called Vanguard Apex Holdings. You told us the equity was clean." Rita's face transitioned from a panicked flush to a ghostly ashen white. Her hands, still trembling, clutched at the air. "It's just a holding structure, Mr. Sterling. My accountant handled the details. It is all very standard." "Embezzlement and money laundering are not exactly standard in this circle," Rita, I countered, stepping to the very edge of the stage so I was looking directly down at her. "And neither is lying to your investors before the ink on the contracts is even dry." I turned my gaze back to the entire room. The journalists were typing furiously on their tablets. The influencers had their phones held high, live streaming the most spectacular social suicide in Hampton's history. I could see the headlines forming in real time. "Let me be crystal clear," I announced, my voice gaining a hard, clinical edge. "The mansion you are currently standing in, the company Rita claims to have built, and every single dollar used to pay for this vintage champagne, all of it is borrowed money. It was borrowed from a company that I own 100%. Vanguard Apex Holdings does not just hold the secondary loan Rita signed on Tuesday. We hold the primary mortgage notes. We are the owners of her debt." Brenda let out a shriek of pure hysterical rage. She tried to charge toward the stage again, but the security guards I had subverted earlier stepped into her path. They weren't protecting her anymore. They were protecting the stage. "You little snake!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking. "I will sue you for everything. You stole that company. It belongs to us." "It belonged to the estate, Brenda," I said, looking down at her with a pity that felt colder than anger. "And the estate was drowning in the debt my grandmother created to trap you. You and Rita spent a decade bleeding our family's company dry. You thought she was blind, but she was just building a cage. And on Tuesday, when Rita signed that $10 million loan with a personal guarantee, she walked right inside and locked the door behind herself." I turned back to Rita, who was now swaying on her feet. The diamond-encrusted dress, which had looked like armor 5 minutes ago, now looked like a shimmering straitjacket. "Now for the part your public relations team won't be able to spin," I continued. The commercial debt covenants you assumed when you accepted your inheritance required a $5 million liquidity floor. You breached that floor the moment you paid the $12 million deposit for this party. On top of that, your secondary loan required an interest payment due yesterday. It bounced, didn't it, Rita? Rita's knees shook. It was just a technical glitch. The bank said, "The bank did not say anything, because I am the bank," I stated flatly. Vanguard Apex is my company. My grandmother left it to me to ensure that the people who spent a decade stealing from our family would finally be held thoroughly accountable. And because you are now 30 days delinquent on the principal repayment of the primary corporate notes, and because you triggered a cross-default with your secondary loan, I am officially exercising my rights as the primary lien holder. I looked at Jasmine. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single red stamped document. She walked up the stairs and handed it to me. I held it up for the cameras to see. "This is a notice of immediate acceleration and foreclosure," I announced. "I have already filed the paperwork with the state of New York. As of 9 p.m. tonight, I have officially activated the foreclosure and seizure clauses. This mansion, the corporate headquarters in Chicago, and every personal asset you own, from your luxury cars to your jewelry, are now under my legal control." The room exploded into a chaotic storm of flashbulbs and shouting. Rita collapsed onto the stage, her knees hitting the white acrylic with a dull thud. She looked small, broken, and utterly defeated. The golden child was gone, replaced by a woman who had finally run out of other people's money to spend. Brenda was on the floor too, sobbing into her fur stole, while Gary stood frozen, his face a mask of bewildered terror. He had been the silent partner in their greed for so long, and now he was facing the same void as the rest of them. "You have 2 hours to vacate the premises," I said, my voice dropping to a final quiet command. I have already had my legal team draft the eviction notices for the remaining properties. Nathan and Jasmine will be moving back into their home tomorrow, and the $8 million you embezzled, the IRS, is already reviewing the audit report I submitted this afternoon. Rita looked up at me, her eyes red and streaming with tears. "Sloane, please, we are family." "Family does not throw their father's belongings into the street," Rita, I replied, handing the microphone to a stunned event coordinator. "And family does not steal from their own blood. You treated me like I was worth exactly $1. Tonight I am just returning the favor." I walked off the stage, my heels clicking firmly on the floor. Jasmine met me at the base of the stairs, a look of profound, silent pride on her face. We did not need to say anything. The look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. The plan had worked perfectly. The audit was finished and the accounts were finally balanced. We walked through the tent past the abandoned caviar trays and the half-empty champagne flutes. The guests were fleeing the scene like rats from a house on fire, whispering and pointing as we passed. We walked out of the tent and into the cool Hamptons night, leaving behind the wreckage of a decade of lies. As we reached our car, I looked up at the moon, feeling a sense of peace I had not known since my father died. The legacy he helped build was no longer a weapon for greedy people. It was back in the hands of someone who actually understood its value. "Is it over?" Jasmine asked as the driver opened the door for us. "For them, it is just beginning," I said, looking back at the glowing lights of the mansion one last time. "But for us, yeah, it is over. We are going home." We slid into the back seat, and as the car pulled away from the gates, I felt the heavy weight of the last 10 years finally lift. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked cousin. I was the woman who had audited her family out of existence, and for the first time in 33 years, I knew exactly what I was worth. I looked at the folder in my lap, feeling the texture of the legal papers. Tomorrow would be busy. There were staff to hire, buildings to inspect, and a massive corporate restructuring to oversee. But as the car sped toward the city, all I could think about was the photograph of my father safe in my bag. I had kept my promise. I had protected his work, and I had done it using the very skills Brenda and Rita had laughed at. Forensic accounting isn't just about finding missing money, I thought as I watched the city lights flicker in the distance. It is about restoring the truth. And tonight, the truth was the most valuable thing I owned. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engine lull me into a state of contented exhaustion. My grandmother's long game was complete, and the victor was exactly who she intended it to be. If you have ever been underestimated or pushed aside by the people who were supposed to support you, remember this moment. Value isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it is hidden in the fine print, waiting for the right person to come along and read it. Thank you for joining me on this journey from the hallway of a law firm to the center of a Hampton stage. Remember, the numbers never lie, and in the end, they always find a way to balance the scales. The blinding flashbulbs of the paparazzi were suddenly drowned out by the harsh, rotating glare of red and blue emergency lights reflecting off the white acrylic panels. The heavy canvas flaps of the main entrance were thrust open with violent force. The murmuring crowd parted instantly. Striding through the center of the elite gathering was Mr. Caldwell. The elderly estate attorney looked entirely out of place amidst the sequined gowns and tuxedos, wearing his signature charcoal wool suit and carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side were 4 uniformed police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they surveyed the chaotic scene. Brenda, who had been sobbing on the floor just moments ago, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her tear-streaked face morphed into a mask of triumphant, desperate relief. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Jasmine and me. "Officers, arrest them right now!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "They are committing corporate espionage. They are trying to steal my daughter's estate. Mr. Caldwell, tell them. Tell the police that Rita is the sole heir and these women are trespassing on our property." Mr. Caldwell did not even look at Brenda. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, walked methodically up the stairs to the stage, and stood beside the spot where Rita was still paralyzed in shock. The lead police officer stepped forward, holding up a hand to silence my aunt. "Nobody is getting arrested for trespassing, ma'am," the officer stated with absolute authority. "We are here acting on federal warrants authorized by a judge this afternoon, and we are here to assist the legal executor of the Margaret estate in delivering a final court-mandated declaration." Mr. Caldwell unlatched his leather briefcase. The metallic click echoed sharply across the silent tent. He reached inside and pulled out a thick sealed envelope stamped with a crimson wax seal bearing my grandmother's personal crest. "Sloane. Jasmine. Please step back up to the stage," Mr. Caldwell instructed, his voice carrying the immense unwavering weight of the law. "This concerns you directly." Jasmine and I exchanged a swift, knowing glance and walked back down the white aisle. We ascended the stairs and stood opposite Mr. Caldwell. Rita remained on the floor between us, her diamond-encrusted dress glittering pathetically under the harsh stage lights. Gary had finally emerged from the crowd, rushing to Brenda's side and looking at the police officers with sheer terror in his eyes. At the will reading yesterday morning, Mr. Caldwell began addressing the entire room, but locking his stern gaze onto Brenda and Rita. I executed the primary directive of my late client. I distributed the assets exactly as they were titled at the time of her death. However, I am legally obligated by a secondary directive filed securely with the probate court to read this final addendum in the presence of all involved parties immediately following the foreclosure trigger of Vanguard Apex Holdings. Mr. Caldwell broke the crimson wax seal. He pulled out 2 sheets of heavy cream-colored parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my grandmother Margaret's sharp, elegant script. "This is the final declaration of Margaret," Mr. Caldwell announced. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud, his voice projecting flawlessly through the dead-silent tent. "To Rita and Brenda, if Mr. Caldwell is reading this letter to you right now, it means the trap has fully closed. It means you could not control your endless suffocating greed for even a single week after my death. It means you spent money you did not have, breached the covenants I meticulously designed, and effectively handed the keys of your own destruction directly over to Sloane." Brenda let out a choked gasp, clutching Gary's arm as if her legs could no longer support her weight. Mr. Caldwell continued, reading, his tone utterly merciless. "Your greed has rotted this family from the inside out for over a decade. Did you honestly think I was blind? Did you think I was just a foolish, senile old woman who could not see the missing capital, the inflated vendor invoices, and the offshore shell accounts? I saw everything. I watched you, Brenda, siphon millions of dollars from the company my husband and my son bled to build. I watched you, Rita, parade around on the internet buying designer bags and luxury cars with stolen money while treating your cousins like dirt beneath your feet. I felt a tight, painful knot form in my throat. Hearing my grandmother's words, her fierce, unwavering defense of our family's true legacy brought tears to my eyes. She had known. She had seen every slight, every insult, and every tear I had shed in secret. I knew that simply calling the authorities would lead to years of exhausting litigation. The letter continued. You would have hired ruthless defense attorneys, hidden the stolen funds, and dragged our family name through the mud. You are parasites, and parasites do not let go until the host is completely dead. So I decided to become a host made entirely of poison. I leveraged the entire estate. I mortgaged the buildings. I took out massive lines of credit against this very mansion. I turned the $15 million of liquid cash you thought you inherited into restricted corporate debt capital. And I gave the absolute control of that debt to the only person in this family with the integrity, the brilliance, and the ruthless precision required to execute my final wishes. Mr. Caldwell paused, looking up from the parchment to look directly at me. His eyes held a deep, profound respect. He turned back to the letter. Sloane is the true protector of this legacy. She possesses the exact analytical mind of her father and the unbreakable steel spine of her grandfather. While you two spent your lives performing for strangers and stealing from your own blood, Sloane worked grueling hours to build a legitimate, honorable career as a forensic accountant. She earned her success. You simply stole yours. Rita let out a loud, agonizing sob, burying her face in her hands. The reality of the letter was crushing the last remaining fragments of her delusion. She was not a self-made billionaire. She was a petty thief who had been outsmarted by an elderly woman. Therefore, Mr. Caldwell read, his voice rising to deliver the final crushing blow. You do not inherit a real estate empire. You do not inherit wealth, property, or status. You inherit the exact toxic liability you manufactured with your own greed. You inherit a $50 million debt that you can never ever repay. Sloane now owns everything legally and rightfully through Vanguard Apex Holdings. She will strip you of your stolen assets, she will evict you from the properties you polluted, and she will hand your financial records over to the federal government. My only regret is that I will not be alive to watch the authorities place you both in handcuffs. Mr. Caldwell lowered the letter and carefully folded the parchment. He placed it back into his leather briefcase, the sharp click of the brass latches echoing loudly. This is a forgery! Brenda screamed, her voice completely unhinged. She broke away from Gary and charged toward the stage, her face twisted in a mask of pure, frantic denial. Margaret would never write that. She loved us. She hated Sloane. You forged this document to steal our company. I am going to have you disbarred, Caldwell. I am going to destroy you. Mr. Caldwell did not even flinch. He looked down at Brenda with an expression of profound, chilling pity. The document was authenticated by 3 independent medical professionals and recorded with the state probate court 6 months ago, Brenda. It is entirely ironclad. And as of this moment, you have far more pressing concerns than threatening my legal license. He gestured to the lead police officer standing near the base of the stairs. The officer stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of folded papers from his tactical vest. Brenda and Gary, the officer stated, his voice booming with absolute authority. We are not here for a trespassing dispute. We are here to execute federal search and seizure warrants authorized by a federal judge regarding an ongoing investigation by the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Gary took a massive step backward, physically distancing himself from his wife. What are you talking about? Gary stammered, his hands raised defensively in the air. I do not have anything to do with the company finances. I am just a consultant. The officer ignored Gary's pathetic attempt to save himself. We have warrants to seize all digital devices, financial records, and physical assets located on this property connected to the offshore Cayman Islands accounts. Furthermore, the officer continued, turning his attention to Rita, who was still weeping on the acrylic floor. Rita, we have a warrant for your immediate detention for questioning regarding federal wire fraud and tax evasion. Rita snapped her head up, her makeup completely ruined, dark streaks running down her cheeks. Detention. You cannot detain me. I am hosting a gala. I am a CEO. You are ruining my brand launch. Jasmine leaned over, a cold, victorious smile playing on her lips. Your brand is officially bankrupt, Rita. And the federal government does not care about your floral arrangements. They care about the $8 million in untaxed capital you funneled through shell corporations to buy your designer shoes. Two female officers walked briskly up the stage stairs. They did not hesitate. They grabbed Rita by her arms, hoisted her to her feet, and pulled her hands firmly behind her back. The loud metallic click of handcuffs snapping around Rita's wrists echoed through the tent. It was the absolute, undeniable sound of a fraudulent empire collapsing into dust. No, Rita screamed, thrashing wildly against the officer's grip. Her heavy diamond-encrusted dress restricted her movements, making her look entirely ridiculous as she struggled. Mom, do something. Call a lawyer. Call somebody. Do not let them take me. But Brenda could not do anything. Two other officers were already moving toward her, reading her the Miranda rights, as they secured her wrists in steel cuffs. Gary simply stood there, trembling in cowardice, watching his wife and daughter being detained without offering a single word of defense. I stood on the stage watching the scene unfold with an absolute profound sense of closure. The 10-year reign of terror, the endless insults, the financial manipulation, and the blatant disrespect were finally over. My grandmother had played the ultimate long game. She had endured their presence, swallowed her disgust, and carefully positioned all the pieces on the board so that I could deliver the final crushing checkmate. Mr. Caldwell turned to me, offering a rare, genuine smile. Your grandmother was incredibly proud of you, Sloane. She told me repeatedly that you were the only one who could handle the weight of this responsibility without letting emotion cloud your judgment. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, I said softly, feeling a tremendous weight lift off my chest, for everything, for guiding her through this and for trusting me to finish it. He nodded respectfully, picked up his briefcase, and walked down the stairs to coordinate the asset seizure with the police officers. I looked out at the remaining crowd. The investors and journalists had captured every single second of the spectacular downfall. The narrative was permanently sealed. Rita and Brenda were not victims of a corporate takeover. They were federal criminals who had been expertly outsmarted by the very family member they had spent years trying to destroy. Brenda thrashed wildly against the grip of the female police officer, her designer heels slipping clumsily on the acrylic floor. The initial shock of the handcuffs had worn off rapidly, replaced by a frantic, venomous delusion. She craned her neck, locking her furious, tear-streaked eyes onto me. You cannot do this! Brenda screamed, her voice entirely hoarse, echoing over the murmurs of the stunned crowd. I am calling my attorneys. We will sue you for every single penny you have, Sloane. This is a false arrest. Unlawful seizure. We will tie you up in civil litigation until you beg for mercy. I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life paying for this humiliation. Go ahead and sue Brenda. A voice sliced through the hysterical screaming like a freshly sharpened scalpel. Jasmine stepped smoothly off the stage, her black silk gown sweeping across the floor. She moved with the predatory, undeniable confidence of a seasoned attorney who had just cornered her prey on the witness stand. In her left hand, she carried a heavy, red-tabbed legal binder. She walked directly toward the arresting officers, who respectfully gave her a few inches of clearance. Jasmine stopped right in front of Brenda and Rita. With a sharp, deliberate motion, she dropped the heavy legal binder onto a nearby acrylic cocktail table. The loud smack of the dense paperwork hitting the plastic surface made Gary physically jump backward. Go ahead and call your expensive defense attorneys. Jasmine continued, her tone dropping to an icy conversational register that was infinitely more terrifying than Brenda's screaming. But before you start dialing, you might want to understand exactly what kind of war you are fighting. Because you are no longer operating in civil court, Brenda. You are not fighting over a contested will or a simple property dispute. Jasmine tapped her manicured finger against the red tab of the binder. She looked at Brenda, then down at Rita, ensuring they both understood the absolute finality of her next words. You see, the Internal Revenue Service does not care about family drama. Jasmine stated, her voice projecting with crystal clear authority. They do not care about forged real estate deeds or who Grandmother Margaret liked best. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division only cares about the $8 million in undeclared capital gains and stolen corporate funds that you systematically routed through the Cayman Islands. Brenda's jaw snapped shut. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. Her threats of lawsuits instantly evaporated, replaced by the suffocating, crushing realization of federal scrutiny. I am a tax attorney. Brenda Jasmine smiled, a cold, victorious expression that promised absolute ruin. And my brilliant sister-in-law is a forensic accountant. Together, we did not just find the missing money, we mapped the entire anatomy of your federal crimes. You used a dummy corporation called Oceanic Consulting to wash the stolen cash. Then you brought it back domestically disguised as brand sponsorships and consulting fees for Gilded Cosmetics. Jasmine leaned in slightly, locking eyes with my aunt. That is not just a family disagreement. That is classic textbook money laundering. It is premeditated wire fraud, and it carries a federal mandatory minimum sentence. Rita began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving against the tight diamond-encrusted bodice of her gown. She looked frantically at her mother, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Rita begged, her voice high and breathless. "Tell her she is lying. Tell them we did not do anything illegal." Jasmine turned her sharp, uncompromising gaze toward my cousin. "Your mother cannot save you, Rita. And do not try to play the innocent, oblivious daughter. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when your signature is literally on the federal tax forms." "I did not know," Rita sobbed, struggling uselessly against the handcuffs. "My accountants handled everything I just signed where they told me to sign. I did not know the money was stolen." Jasmine let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That is a fantastic defense. I am sure the federal judge will love hearing it. Unfortunately for you, your certified public accountant flipped the absolute second the federal agents showed him the paper trail Sloane uncovered. He took a full immunity deal yesterday morning. He handed over every single email, every encrypted text message, and every wire transfer authorization you and Brenda ever sent him. He gave them the entire fraudulent enterprise on a silver platter to save his own skin." Brenda sagged against the police officer holding her, her legs finally giving out. The reality of the situation had fundamentally broken her. There was no loophole. There was no clever legal maneuver to escape this. She had been completely and thoroughly dismantled. Gary, who had been trying to slowly, quietly back away into the crowd of onlookers, suddenly turned to run toward the exit. Jasmine pointed directly at him, her voice snapping like a whip. "Do not think you are walking away from this, Gary." Gary froze, his shoulders hunched in sheer cowardice. He slowly turned around, his face slick with nervous sweat. "I did not do anything," Gary stammered, his hands raised in surrender. "I am just her husband. I do not run the accounts. I never touched the money." "You filed jointly with Brenda for the last 10 years, Jasmine countered, taking immense satisfaction in destroying his pathetic attempt to flee. "Under federal law, you are jointly and severally liable for the tax evasion. You signed those fraudulent returns. You enjoyed the luxury cars and the country club memberships funded by stolen, untaxed capital. The Financial Crimes Unit has a transport van waiting for you right outside the main gate." Two officers immediately broke away from the main group and flanked Gary, grabbing his arms and securing them behind his back. He did not fight them. He just began to weep, a quiet, pathetic sound that perfectly matched his character. Jasmine turned her attention back to Brenda for the final devastating blow. "So go ahead, Brenda. Tell your lawyers to sue us. But understand this very clearly. The IRS has already executed a freeze on every single one of your personal bank accounts. You cannot pay a retainer. You cannot post bail using stolen money. You are completely, utterly, and legally broke. You have nothing left to fight with." The lead officer gave a sharp nod. "Take them out," he commanded. The officers began to march Brenda, Gary, and Rita down the white acrylic stage, leading them directly through the center of the massive, silent crowd. The journalists parted to make way, their cameras flashing relentlessly, capturing every agonizing second of the perp walk. Rita was sobbing uncontrollably, her heavy gown dragging across the floor, catching on the expensive white orchids lining the aisle. Brenda stared straight ahead, her eyes dead and vacant, finally stripped of the arrogant superiority she had worn like a crown her entire life. Gary stumbled along behind them, looking like a broken, terrified shell of a man. I stood on the stage beside Jasmine, watching them being escorted out of the clear tent and into the cool Hamptons night. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated their exit, casting long, erratic shadows across the manicured lawn. The heavy doors of the transport vans slammed shut, a sound that echoed with profound, absolute finality. Jasmine picked up the red-tabbed legal binder from the cocktail table and walked back up the stairs to stand beside me. She let out a long, satisfied breath. "Well," Jasmine said, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. "I believe that concludes the business portion of the evening." I looked out at the flashing police lights disappearing down the long, sweeping driveway. The empire of lies my aunt and cousin had built was completely gone, erased in a matter of hours by the uncompromising power of the truth. I had not just taken back my family's legacy, I had surgically removed the infection that had been killing it for a decade. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers eventually faded into the dark horizon, taking with them the last toxic remnants of my family's darkest chapter. We did not stay in the Hamptons to watch the hired caterers pack up the ruined party or watch the bewildered guests whisper their way to the valet stand. I secured the property with a private security firm, ensuring my father's belongings and the family assets were finally safe from any further destruction, and we flew directly back home. By the next morning, the financial and social worlds were ablaze with the spectacular, undeniable implosion of Rita and Brenda. The headlines across every major news network were ruthless and swift. The self-proclaimed beauty mogul and her socialite mother were plastered across front pages, not as the brilliant billionaires they had desperately pretended to be, but as federal inmates awaiting trial without bail. The media gleefully dismantled their fake empire piece by piece. Financial journalists exposed the staggering $50 million debt, the breached loan covenants, and the Cayman Islands money laundering scheme. Rita's massive social media following evaporated overnight, replaced by millions of mocking comments dissecting her fraudulent lifestyle. Gilded Cosmetics was immediately seized, its inventory liquidated to pay off a fraction of the penalties they owed the federal government. Their delusions of grandeur were completely shattered, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of concrete cells and the absolute certainty of mandatory federal prison sentences for massive tax evasion and corporate fraud. A week later, Jasmine and I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of our corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. The crisp, cool evening air hit my face, carrying the electric, vibrant energy of the city. I took a deep, grounding breath, feeling the chill fill my lungs. The suffocating weight I had carried since I was a child, the constant belittling, the gaslighting, the feeling of never being quite enough for my own blood relatives, was completely gone. I stood on the pavement and realized I had absolutely no desire to look back over my shoulder. There was nothing left in the past worth looking at. Nathan and Jasmine had officially moved back into their home, completely free from the threat of eviction. I had legally transferred the deed of that property directly into Nathan's name, ensuring no one could ever use his sanctuary as leverage against him again. He was back at his veterinary clinic, surrounded by his rescue dogs, smiling brighter and breathing easier than he had in years. Jasmine was thriving, having used the high-profile surgical takedown of the embezzlement ring to secure a highly coveted junior partnership at her tax law firm. We had functioned as a flawless team and we had won unequivocally. I had successfully regained the respect that was stolen from me so long ago. I had recovered the generational wealth my father and grandfather had bled to build, stabilizing the real estate corporation and restructuring the debt properly under Vanguard Apex Holdings. But the absolute greatest victory was not the money, the restored commercial properties, or the Hamptons mansion. The true lasting victory was the total permanent eradication of toxic people from my life. I no longer had to endure family dinners filled with backhanded compliments. I no longer had to watch my hard-working brother be humiliated by people who contributed nothing to society. I had amputated the disease, and the patient was finally recovering. However, sitting on a mountain of recovered assets felt incomplete without a larger, more meaningful purpose. My grandmother Margaret had possessed the fierce financial brilliance to build an inescapable trap, and I had the auditing skills to execute it. But I knew there were countless women out there who lacked the resources, the education, or the support to protect themselves from financial abuse. They were women trapped in marriages with manipulative partners, women being exploited by greedy relatives, women who simply did not know how to read a balance sheet, secure their own independence, or recognize when they were being systematically robbed. I decided to channel a significant portion of the recovered holding company assets into a brand new endeavor. I established the Margaret Vanguard Foundation. It was a fully funded nonprofit organization dedicated exclusively to providing advanced financial education and legal advocacy for women. With Jasmine sitting on the board of directors providing pro bono tax and legal counsel, we offered free clinics on forensic accounting basics, asset protection, and debt management. I wanted to ensure that no woman who walked through our doors could ever be financially gaslighted, swindled, or backed into a corner by abusers hiding behind confusing legal jargon. We gave them the tools to audit their own lives and reclaim their power. Walking down the bustling Chicago street alongside Jasmine, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and city life, I felt an incredible surge of power and absolute peace. The city lights reflected in the dark waters of the Chicago River, bright and unyielding. The rusty safety deposit box key that had started this entire journey was now framed and sitting on my desk in my corner office. It served as a daily reminder that real power does not come from loud, flashy parties, designer clothes, or the approval of toxic relatives. Real power comes from knowing exactly what you are worth, understanding the numbers, and having the absolute courage to demand the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried. I had audited my family, balanced the scales of justice, and the future was entirely mine to write. The story of Sloane's strategic triumph over her toxic family serves as a powerful reminder that true power doesn't come from flashy displays of wealth or seeking the validation of those who mistreat you. The most profound lesson here is that financial literacy and emotional independence are your absolute strongest shields against manipulation. For years, Sloane endured gaslighting and belittlement from relatives who masked their own greed with arrogant cruelty. However, instead of reacting with raw emotion or sinking to their chaotic level, she used her sharp intellect, firm boundaries, and an uncompromising grasp of the truth to dismantle their empire of lies. This narrative teaches us that we never have to accept abuse simply because it is delivered by blood relatives. Toxicity thrives on silence and ignorance, but it inevitably crumbles under the heavy weight of hard facts and unyielding self-worth. Sloane's journey from being treated as though she were worth a single dollar to becoming the architect of her own freedom proves that when you know your actual value, no one can successfully diminish you. Take a moment today to audit your own life both financially and emotionally, and bravely cut ties with anyone who diminishes your true worth.